Thanks again to our social data panel. I thought that was very interesting. I hope you did too. Jerry is a research manager with the CMO advisory part of IDC, and for those of you who probably know IDC, you know what an amazing analyst firm it is. They're right here in the Boston area, out in Framingham, and Jerry is an expert in using predictive analytics, and he has a pretty amazing set of findings to share with you, and I think you're going to enjoy his talk, so please give Jerry your full attention and enjoy. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Can everybody hear me now? All right, good. Man, you can really get a good workout on this room. It's like all the way down there and all the way down there. The 4 video guys going to be back and forth. So just a quick background, a little more detail on me and my client base. I work at a service in IDC called the CMO Advisory, where we serve senior marketing and marketing operations executives in, probably 40 of the 100 largest high-tech companies in the world. And we do that from an advisory point of view. So many of you who may be familiar with IDC know us for our market forecasts, market shares, competitive analysis, that sort of thing. I don't do any of that in my practice. I provide benchmarking and best practice research for senior marketers to use internally to apply efficiencies to their internal marketing operations. So that's my background, and the things I'm going to share with you today is research based on my interactions with those clients, our direct research with them, and a lot of the inquiries and services and consulting that they do with us. I think what you're going to find interesting, and certainly what I found interesting in terms of working with them, if you think about my client base, these are the guys who build all the stuff that stores, analyzes, distributes, socializes, big data, and BI and analytics. And I think what you're going to see, and certainly what surprised me was, even those companies are not really at the cutting edge yet in terms of applying all of this stuff, particularly in their marketing areas. They've got lots of other analytics going on all over the place. But in marketing, I think they're still coming up a learning curve here. So managing the restaurant at the end of the big data universe. What's the deal with the subtitle? So my conclusion, the analogy that I use in working with my clients and with anybody that's either starting or managing a predictive analytics service within marketing or anywhere else in your organization, is that it's a lot like running a restaurant. Because in both cases, you're dealing with this really diverse set of perishable ingredients, right? And you're trying to bring them into the centralized location where you have a very relatively small staff of highly specialized people who are going to do all this cool processing and try to do all this innovative, creative work with the ingredients. And then you need a staff to bring it out to your customer. And that's a really critical part of this whole process. Kind of keep that restaurant analogy in mind as you're thinking about building and running your predictive analytics practice, because it's the whole servicing model that's really critical. A lot of times people get stuck in the data, and it's sort of, there's an interesting kind of transition between going from what the data says to deeply held beliefs in senior management, executive committees. Like, those people are successful, have made lots of really good decisions in their careers, and they're in places of power because of their good judgment and instinct and their guts. And they've made all of those decisions without the power of big data. So it's an interesting cultural dynamic, and I think you've heard a little bit about that this afternoon as well. So I'm going to, hopefully you've read the little snippet about my presentation. I'm going to show you quickly 4 examples, because what's interesting about predictive analytics, particularly for marketers, is that it's one of the areas that actually pays off and can show a really hard, easily demonstrable ROI from the marketing team. And a lot of, especially in my client base, where we do a lot of business-to-business, enterprise systems and solutions selling. This is 9 to 12 to 18-month-long sales cycles. It's really hard for marketing to show that connection to the end-user transaction. In consumer businesses, it's a very different model. It's much easier, and so that stress is not there. But I'll show you some examples of that. And what's interesting about it is that the gap of improvement we're seeing revealed by the data is like orders of magnitude bigger than all the incremental improvements and kind of continual optimization that we try to do on these processes. It's kind of opening people's eyes up to the idea that, wow, we can't just be 15% better or faster. We can actually be 2, 3, 4 times better or faster. And we didn't realize that because we couldn't see the data. We didn't really understand where we were. We didn't even know exactly where we were with respect to the problem we're trying to solve, and we really didn't understand the potential. And then I'm going to show you just a quick couple slides on our model for maturing predictive analytics service, and then how to build it out. So starting from scratch and building a analytics team within a marketing department. We'll talk about some of the skills and roles that are needed to build it out. So a couple quick examples. Here's an enterprise solution selling company. So they're selling systems in the 6- and 7-figure range. Their predictive analytics guys built a little model. It was an upselling, cross-selling kind of model where they looked at customers that bought, I'm going to highly simplify this, of course, I've got a very complicated product line, but looked at companies who bought product A and companies who bought product B. And then they looked at companies that bought A and B. And then they went back at those two populations and said, well, how come some companies bought solution A but never went to B, and how come some bought B and never went to A? And what they did was they collected all the internal information, their business relationships, their marketing practices, all their sales stuff, everything they could find. And one of the key challenges was getting the product information, getting all the SKUs out of the product database. And then they overlaid that with some of the business criteria and customer information that they had about those accounts. And what they did was they said, look, there are some companies who bought product A and never went to B, but they're very similar. They have very similar, they're change in management or in merger and acquisition, or they're in a similar technology life cycle in terms of transitioning to a new platform. And those companies are really well qualified. I mean, they're slam dunks for buying product B. And all they did essentially was send out a new list to the sales reps. And the sales reps just made a bunch of phone calls, and 200 million euros just kind of essentially dropped out of the sky. There was the incremental sales and marketing effort. I don't know how many of you have like pre-teenage kids who you sometimes try to play video games with, but like when you get really smoked by your kid and he blanks you, it's like donut, right? Donut. They spent nothing. Essentially, yeah, there's nothing like having a 12-year-old gloat over you. That's terrible. It's the worst. But they essentially there were no additional marketing programs. They didn't hire any new salespeople. There was very little incremental effort in order to get that revenue. It was literally sitting there the whole time, latent revenue, just sitting in their customer base. They just had to discover it. So that was a kind of a big model. Here's a very small model. Here's an example of a company didn't have any predictive analytics whatsoever. And in fact, it was just a marketing operations manager working with a summer intern who happened to be from Berkeley and had a .edu license to SPSS or some sort of analytics package. And they put together this little model to look at their scoring, their lead scoring algorithm that they had developed probably 2 years ago, and looked at it twice afterwards. And what they discovered was that model was out of date, and it was a very linear model. And in fact, there were some very distinct laws of diminishing return on downloads and marketing activity and all this stuff, the digital body language that we're all starting to collect in marketing. And by tuning that, they were able to double their leads and show huge impact on the sales pipeline. And as a result of that, they were able to go to management and say, hey, with just like half a person down in the basement with a .edu license, we generated all this new revenue potential into the pipeline. And management was like, okay, great, go get more. And they wrote them a 7-figure check. They went out and bought a whole system and hired up the team. And we'll tell you a little bit more about that story. Once again, they got bageled. They didn't have to spend any additional money on marketing programs. So here's a story of a website, financial services website, not Fidelity's, but similar kind of a company. Been up on the internet for 10 or 12 years, millions of hits every month. You think, wow, this is a really big company. This is a website that has massive volume. It's been up for a long time. It's probably optimized, right? Well, when they started looking at their user behavior, and they had this online software that they wanted people to get into and complete transactions through, they didn't make any money until you get to the end. What they found out was there were several different behavior patterns on their website. They found there were people who spent a lot of time on a few pages and then kind of got stuck and didn't get started. Then there were a lot of people who spent very little time looking at loads of pages, and they kind of got scattered and never really got back on track. And then there was kind of the sweet spot. Okay, now we understand if there's a pattern of use of this kind of cadence and timeline through maybe a sweet spot of 10 to 15 pages or less, then those are that's how we want to, those are the people that are very likely to start and complete our software transaction. And so what they did was they built in just a couple of little tweaky things on their website. So like a little chat intervention. If you're sitting there on a web page for 5 minutes, or maybe 2 minutes, they're going to pop up a chat and say, hey, would you like to, are you looking for detailed information? Would you like to, do you want more information on this subject? To give a little interaction to try to move them back on track. And same thing with the people who are flipping around all over the place. As a result of just doing that, just kind of taking the long tail on both edges of their user experience curve and trimming them a little bit, $10 million in new revenue popped up out of the website. Again, very little incremental investment. So the last one, consumer model. It's a major sports entertainment website. And these guys had a couple of services. One was a subscription model service, fairly well-known kind of activity that you might do on a sports website. And another one was a kind of a pay-per-use model, and it wasn't very well-known. And they did some testing, and they found out that their investment in search, digital versus traditional media, was kind of evenly split for both models. They kind of just 50-50'd it and threw it out there. They didn't know which was effective for which product line. But after looking at it, they discovered, this product line that we have for subscription is fairly well known. People know categorically go search on that, and they will come and find our website among our competitors. And so they realized, well, obviously we should switch, invest more heavily in the digital side on that product. And on the other product that was not very well known, people didn't know the category to even what words to use in a search, they then invested more in traditional marketing. So the overall marketing spend didn't change. They just changed the marketing mix, and all of a sudden popped up 45% increase in subscription revenues. And these are all examples of things that came out of marketing, right? And if you're in a B2B marketing department, it is really, really hard and rare to find yourself going to management with a big pile of cash and saying, hey, we just produced $10 million or $100 million or 200 million euros. Hardly ever happens in our business. I couldn't find another round-shaped piece of food, so that's like banana cream pie. Okay, a couple of quick slides on the model for data-driven marketing. So how many folks are marketing business to business? A few. How many are mostly consumer? So 50, 50, 50, okay. So in either case, it's especially true for businesses and B2B marketing, where you have multiple departments that are kind of touching the customer over a long period of time, but it's also important for consumer marketers as well. And that is that, the idea here is that marketing, more than any other customer-facing function, is highly dependent on all the downstream activities that occur with the customer. So we really need to know a lot about what happened in one marketing campaign, the next marketing campaign, but then what happened when we dropped that lead into the sales pipeline. And then did they complete? Did they go to a deal? $1 million customer is not the same as another $1 million customer. What happened over the course of the lifetime of that relationship? Did they come back and buy more product from us? Did we get more revenue? Or were they a really high cost, pain in the neck, and oh my God, they were a nightmare customer? So at each stage of the game, marketing needs more and more information to inform the strategic and tactical decisions and investments that they're making at the top of the funnel, right? So if I'm just in marketing and I'm saying, well, I got 2 landing pages, one generated 1,000 hits, one generated 100 hits, well, I'm going to invest in the first one because I got more hits. And I'm getting quoted on 30,000 leads or a quarter to my sales guys, so I'm going to drive the pipeline and hit my quota. I have no idea what happens after that, but I've got my number. Now, if I have visibility into the sales pipeline and I realize, wow, out of those 1,000 that came from the first website, only a few of them trickled through to the end and actually created a customer. But of the 100 of the second website, wow, many, like 2 or 3 more times of them became customers. It's actually a much more powerful driver once we get into the sales process. It's much more highly qualified lead. But I don't know that if I don't have access to data into the sales pipeline, into the deal database, into the billing and revenue systems, as well as into account management and customer lifetime management calculations. So I know which kind of customers are ideal in which parts of the pipeline, which kind of customers do we actually want in terms of financial driving our P&L and our revenue numbers. And this is really critical information for marketers to have, and they very rarely have it, as this chart shows. When we surveyed our clients, they're telling us, look, we get good information from our marketing systems. Social is just kind of moving along here. But we don't really have good or effective ways to get that information. And when we look at, we've got our reports on the maturity of the ability to do marketing automation systems and the ability to do data-driven marketing, what we see is as the systems evolve and integrate, that's kind of like it sets the table for the rest of the your analytical capabilities to evolve. So as you think about the restaurant, you're thinking about, okay, there's a very wide amount, there's a wide range of internal resources that marketing needs to get access to. In some companies, it can be hard to get access to that stuff. We have clients where there's very good relationships and they have visibility all the way through the line. We have clients where sales and marketing don't talk to each other. In fact, they actually have an outside services firm that takes the leads from marketing and does it into the CRM, and they literally, physically never talk to each other. So anyway, it's important to try to get your whole business relationship and try to tell this story about, yes, you can start in marketing, but in order to have greater and greater strategic impact on the business, you need to have a much broader view throughout the whole customer creation and life cycle of the relationship. And this is just a quick look in terms of if you're thinking in terms of just framing your project and your team and developing that function. Typically, if you're just getting started and you're underfunded and maybe you don't have a data-driven management team that's writing big fat checks for you right out of the gate, you want to start small, use data that you own and apply it to a process that you own, and eventually build from there. Just like the storyline of one of my examples where they showed the lead scoring example was something that was data that marketing owned. It was a process that marketing owned, and it resulted in a number that they could go back and use to build an economic case to build out the whole function. And that was a very powerful way to get started and fund the predictive analytics work at this company. And so one of the lessons learned there is it's important to get the first couple of applications right, and I'll show you some in a minute. So big data and the restaurant at the end of the big data universe. So 4 things you got to do, right? You got to manage your suppliers, and hopefully you don't have to deal with these two very often. You have to build your staff, right? You obviously got to have some specialized skills, but as some of the examples I've given show, you don't necessarily need to be up to your eyeballs in data scientists to get going. You also need to develop a menu, right? So you need to have some control over what exactly are you doing. You can't just have a data, a blank check, and you're going to have, once word gets out that there's a 200% improvement in this or a 400% improvement in that, or the sales guy in the cubicle next to me is getting 15% on his quota because he's got your model and I don't, all of a sudden you're going to have requests kind of coming out of the woodwork. So you really need to develop a menu of services and some entry and acceptance and rejection criteria for project for working on projects and serving your internal customers. So lastly, you got to serve your internal customers. As we've alluded to a couple of times, there are some cultural issues around predictive analytics. And one of the problems is that people who work in predictive analytics tend to be data-oriented folks, particularly the data scientists, to get really deep into these data models. They kind of come to the data from a kind of an agnostic point of view with respect to the business. They don't really care whether the data says we should invest more, go left or go right. But management, the rest of the company may really care whether we're going to go left or right. And that's where you have to really potentially put on the pink outfit and the roller skates and sell the model. There's a little bit of politicking and finessing that has to go on in terms of creating a safe cultural environment for people to make decisions based on your model. You got to kind of respect the fact that you're asking somebody else to put their KPIs on the line for what is initially an untested service, an untested model. So there's a couple of challenges you got to get over, and so we'll show you a couple of techniques for this. So in terms of the supply side, we mentioned there's a very big and diverse world of data out there. We talked about social data. I mean, social data in itself has all kinds of issues of reliability and trustworthiness and timeliness and the ability to actually translate all this social activity into something that could be used as a transactional trigger in a marketing campaign. Does a certain number of posts or a blog actually qualify someone to become a target or a lead for us? Right? You want to actually get to know the folks who are running all these databases around your enterprise. Some, like social marketing, they're always on. There's billions of transactions every 48 hours. Others are going to be batch-oriented, more transactional-oriented. Some of them are going to be fairly small and highly specialized. So you've got to get to know the people who run these things. They normally have, if they're good, they've got newsletters and alerts that go out in terms of whether their sources, if there's any change in the definitions they're using, the data structures, or the sourcing, if they have a delay or an interruption in their data. And you really need to know that as someone running a predictive analytics function, because the more data you have, the more potential you have to find really cool, creative insights to help drive your business. One of the other things culturally is this idea of differentiating the data you're using in your predictive analytics models from sort of the general customer data. And this depends on your company and what sort of the general idea, general reputation of your customer data is. A lot of companies that we work with, we hear this refrain a lot: our data is crap. And if that's the general feeling about your customer data, any model built on that is simply going to be rejected, right? That's the first line of rejection. So there's really three. And it's, number one is your data is crap, right? You got crappy. If you're using our data, which we already know is crappy because we're the salespeople and we're putting it in there and manipulating it because we need to show the pipeline, we know it's crap and we're not going to believe your model. Number two, if you convince me you've got the data's okay, then my next line of rejection is going to be the model's crap. So I don't understand how you did this. It's a black box, and this kind of data science black magic. Good luck. I wasn't involved in this. I didn't really understand what you were doing, so I don't have time right now to ramp up on that. So that's line number line number two. The third line is, finally, when both of those walls have been knocked down and really there's no further rational basis for rejecting the model, is you're crap. But actually, don't take it personally. It's just them kind of getting over themselves and going through that whole acceptance process, taking the first steps down this data-driven path to decision making. All right, so this whole idea of communicating data, the quality of the data, is really important. And when you get successes, it's really important to have your customers kind of evangelize for you and help you drive adoption of this process. Okay, staffing. I've shown you, in my examples, I kind of gave you a look at what a starter package looks like for data analytics, right? You don't need to hire data scientists right now. You don't need big data. You don't need huge analytics capabilities. You can really get started if you scope the project properly and you have a data set and some processes that you own and that are good, well-known metrics. You can actually get started on a very, very small scale and be extremely effective. It's almost more important to pick the right project at the beginning than to pick the right people. And once you get going, you can kind of build out a team that looks a lot like this. And what you see here is essentially kind of on the left-hand side, more of a technical infrastructure roles in terms of getting all the systems and the data hygiene and data processes and the integration and standardization, synchronization of the data and the ecosystem that the data lives in, maintained and up and running. Then you have what really is a very relatively small number of people doing analytics. It's like the restaurant model, right? You've got all these people growing stuff and raising cattle and bringing cool specialized products into your restaurant, but you really only have a very small staff relative to the supply chain in terms of taking that and transforming it into something really cool that your customers are going to love. And then you definitely need these guys at the front end, right? They've got to be out there working with the line of business people so that the line of business people, number one, understand what you're doing, and that the data scientists, number two, understand what the line of business people, what their priorities are, how they think, what they're really interested in. This is a critical function, that process role at the front end of this, to make sure that the data scientists and the line of business people are all kind of embedded in this project management from the very beginning or very early on. So develop your menu. Here's a few applications. I gave you four at the top. We talked about lead marketing, marketing mix, or lead nurturing, marketing mix. We talked about UI, or UX optimization for website. So these are some good examples of applications that have paid off for our clients on both a small and large scale. Some of them are in marketing. Some of them are working with a direct sales force. Those of you who are working with direct sales, I just want to show you a quick slide on a model that EMC did on territory optimization. So EMC, big data a big data provider. That's the term I was looking for. They've got reams and reams of data and tools and analysts and data scientists, right? And so they've got this function in their marketing operations area, and they're looking at how territories are assigned to their various sales reps in this territory. Now, I don't want to get into the whole sales thing right now because we're mostly talking about marketing, but there's two things that are really, I want you to take away from this slide. Number one, it's a really good, interesting visualization, right? So you go to a salesperson like this and show them this information. They can see, oh, here's the market opportunity with the gray spheres, and here's the various segment-oriented opportunities and accounts that each of those guys are managing within those opportunities. So I can get a sense of who's got a bigger overall opportunity, who's got a kind of homogeneous mix, who's got a very heterogeneous mix of clients that they're serving, and maybe I can use that to tweak my assignments or something. And so that leads into kind of the second big observation about data models, and that is that they're really a advisory type of model, that you want to make sure that the person you're serving is ultimately going to use their own judgment and say, okay, this is interesting, I haven't thought of it that way before, but there may be lots of reasons why I can't optimize this straight out of the model. There may be geographic issues, there may be expertise issues in terms of familiarity with the reps have in different industries, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of other reasons why a line of business person can say, that's cool, you did a lot of really hard work on that, but I can't actually do much with it, right? Or they could say, this is really cool, I can completely change my whole territory assignment model, and I've got a much more efficient team. And that's why it's important to bring these guys in throughout the course of the project. So lastly, serve your customers. I think we've talked a lot about, in my presentation and the rest of them you've heard today, the fact that, interestingly enough, even in my clients who you would think would be highly data-oriented company cultures, there's a lot of resistance to accepting and just using these models to drive senior-level decision-making. The models really need to prove themselves, and the model building team needs to prove itself. So you have to be cognizant and respectful of the fact of, eventually, especially when you're getting started or when you're building a new model for a new application, you need a business sponsor who's going to essentially stick their neck out and at least give you part of their team to say, okay, we'll A/B test it. I'll give you 10 of my inside reps, and we'll try the model. Or I'll give you this number of landing pages, or I'll give you this campaign. You can try it on that. And you have to be willing to work in that respect with your line of business sponsors, so that it's a safe thing for them to apply to their business. And if it hits, great. Let them tell the awesome story of all the benefits that they got out of it, because they are going to be the most powerful champions and evangelists of your success. So, in sum, before we go to questions, and I'm pretty close on time, it's really critical to pick the right project, really no matter what stage you're in, because you are going to put some investment in it, and you want to make sure continuously that you're showing impact, and whether it's hard ROI or it's at least a improvement on a very well-known established metric within your organization. You really don't want to have these squishy targets that people don't really know. Well, we're not really sure how we define churn rate in this particular segment. It could be this, it could be that. No, don't go there. You want to make sure you have a nice hard metric to go after, so it's very well understood, and it's going to give you at least a good benchmark. We're going to be higher or lower. Okay, we're either going to miss or we're going to be up, and that'll at least give you instant feedback there. We talked about the data in terms of separating the data sets that you're using, and you can apply a higher level of quality standards and quality assurance on the data sets you're using for your models than may exist in the rest of the customer data ecosystem in your businesses, depending on where you're at with those. And so some of our clients have gone so far as to actually brand the data and saying, okay, this is marketing approved data. We've gone through a higher level of quality assurance for this particular data set. We're not using the crappy massive data sets that are out there. We've actually extracted the good stuff. Even in the worst databases, there are still bright spots that you can use to bring into your model, and just have to be careful if that's the kind of general reputation of overall data, that you are very clear about doing that. Oh, did I just turn it off? Sorry. Wow, it's more powerful, much more powerful remote than they usually give you. Okay, so then sponsorship and collaboration, how to run the team, right? So it's really ideal if you have a line of business sponsor who can, who's going to be very active in the whole project in terms of defining the project, working with the data analysts, and even understanding where the data is coming from, because they're eventually going to be your evangelist, your champion once the model is delivered. And they can also be, obviously, your judge and jury if it doesn't work out so well. But what you want is someone who's going to work with you. So the model may not go out and ring the bell first time, but they can come back and say, okay, now that it's been in the field, here's what the 10 inside reps are saying about the model. It worked in these situations, but maybe didn't work in those situations. So now let's go back and tweak it a little bit. Because you want to have an iterative process, kind of a beta. If anybody's familiar with the whole software release process, I'm sure you've heard this idea of the beta test. So you kind of want to do that and work with a good line of business sponsor. Get those users and the data scientists talking to each other early in the process. And if any of you are familiar with Agile project management, it's a really excellent methodology to use for predictive analytics processes, because it's a project that can change very quickly, because you're building, no matter what kind of data you're using, you at some point have got to build in some business assumptions about how you're going to treat the data. And those assumptions can always change, right? Because there's competitive things happening. There's always changes in the market that are going on, new regulations, et cetera. And you want to make sure you have as responsive as possible a process, so you can very quickly sense that kind of change going on in the market and build it into the model. And what's nice about that is that once models are out and they're being used and they're well established, you don't walk away from it. You stay in the loop and make sure that there aren't competitive or market changes that are happening that are going to essentially blow up some of the assumptions that are built into the model. So I just got the 5-minute warning sign, which is usually like Q&A. So that's really all I had to present to you guys this afternoon. More than happy to take questions. I know it's a very big topic, and I mean, normally I do this in 10 minutes, but I give you 30, so what the heck. You got a question here?
So, various things that you like, are there some that sort of give a quick return, and you would recommend that they go to some of these first?
Yeah. So the question is, are there applications that I would recommend you do first because they give quick return? And it's a hard question to answer because it really depends on different businesses. So in some cases, a lead scoring, a application of predictive analytics to the lead scoring model might be, that's a quick win. We can do it really easily. In other cases, it may be something completely different because you don't have the data, or we don't have a good metric, or there's some other project criteria that are missing. So I think you got to assess the project, use some clearly defined criteria to assess whether it's a good project or not before you just say, oh yeah, let's do territory optimization because that was on Jerry's slide, and obviously that's a slam dunk. You really need to apply some judgment within your own organization. Anything else? I'm looking this way. We got one over there too. Yeah. Okay.
So my question was, I guess, is up with a lot of these tech companies, Electrical, Oracle, Salesforce, that kind of IDs starting to merge together. What's your opinion as far as where the CMO is? It sounds like they Heinz don't make decisions. Where do you see the market catching up? So seems like tech companies are kind of at the forefront of adopting these.
Yeah. So the question is about Oracle and Eloqua and marketing automation and CRM systems, and kind of where is the IT market going in terms of supplying the infrastructure to do this, right? So clearly we've got marketing automation that came out and now is being consolidated into larger enterprise solution vendors, and essentially we see this thing being rolled up very much like the supply chain market. So this whole customer-facing circulatory system that you want to develop for data, it's very much like managing the supply chain, right? So 15 or 20 years ago, we did all these things in a very siloed way. So the data and all the functions and all the investments and the systems were all done. And here's manufacturing, here's the warehouse, here's logistics, here's retail, blah, blah, blah. And somebody finally had the great idea that, someone takes a widget out on the front end, let's send another one through. But you can't do that unless you have an enterprise owner and an enterprise definition for that whole supply chain. And the same thing is happening on the customer side. So it's happening slowly, particularly in our industry, because it's a very complex relationship with a lot of customers, with a lot of products. So that infrastructure, I think the future of that infrastructure is going to look a lot like the supply chain, where you get a single major supplier can kind of give you almost everything along the whole, from social listening and analytics to marketing automation to the whole CRM pipeline management and reporting function to the billing backend, data analytics, and even the big data warehousing stuff in the and master data management infrastructures. That, some of these companies like an IBM today are almost there. Like 80 or 90% of the way through the whole infrastructure. But not everybody can buy that from IBM right now. It's expensive. So I think time is up. I'd be more than happy to take additional questions if anybody has them out in the lobby for a few minutes. Thank you very much for your attention. This is a tough slot in the afternoon. Thanks for sticking with me there.